Present knew that this was beyond magic. It was outright scary. What frustrated the scientists mostly was the fact that they were certain they had an instrument in their possession that would put the eyeball back into that eye socket, but no one knew how to use it. The concept of self-activating machines programmed by very advanced intelligences to neutralize gravity, render invisibility, and project holograms came into sharper focus for me by May 2007. That's when a series of photographs of dragonfly-shaped, highly strange aerial craft began to emerge, beginning with this one taken on May 5th, 2007 in Lake Tahoe, California, by anonymous submitter 7013 in an email to MUFON. Then the images were sent to Earth Files and the Coast to Coast AM websites. The next day, on May 6, 2007, this series of photos were taken by a man who called himself Chad. He said his location was in the Bakersfield region east of San Luis Obispo. And he said that behind him in his house, his wife was pregnant and quite ill, and as he watched this object and tried to take photographs, he noticed that there were diagrams and symbols and maybe numbers on the tail. And this is the closest that he ever got, but it plays a very important role in this whole issue of self-activating machines interacting, monitoring, and sending information from this planet. 10 days later, on May 16, 2007, a man calling himself Rajman 1977 said he was with his family having lunch in Capitola, northwest of San Luis Obispo, when they saw this in the sky, and he took a series of photographs. And you can see on this closer one at the power poles, the same kind of tail with what appear to be designs underneath. Now, the red circles on this map, they are marking. Here was Lake Tahoe. This is the first one. Then you come down to Yosemite National Park, Kings Canyon National Park, Sequoia National Park, the Bakersfield region, Capitola, north of Monterey, and the Big Basin Redwood State Park near Saratoga. These bright pink outlines over here are around the China Lake Naval Weapons Center facilities, and east of San Jose in this area is the Castle Air Force Base. And then when you go between Monterey, you come to, it's hard for me to see on this angle, but it's over here that you've got Fort Ord, an Army base. And also beyond California, over the past 2 decades, dragonfly-shaped aerial objects have also been described for the past 22 years in Oregon, Arizona, Alabama, Louisiana, Arkansas, and Ohio. On June 5th, 2007, this photograph and 3 others were emailed from a man who simply called himself Stephen. And where was he? He was in Big Basin Park near Saratoga. That was his last photo. And then in the hard mail, in my post office box, I found a letter from a man named Ty Brannigan, who was also bicycling in Big Basin on June 5th, 2007, the same day that Stephen took his 4. And Ty sent me 12 hard paper glossy photographs. He said in a letter that this aerial object suddenly appeared rotating slowly clockwise and then counterclockwise randomly. Ty said he was frustrated that he never got his camera fast enough to photograph the first 2 times the astonishing machine appeared flickering on and off in the sky. So he strapped his camera on his wrist in case there was a third appearance. Ty said that happened closer to him and his fellow bicyclers, and he got the 12 shots before the strange aerial machine flickered in and out of invisibility. The Dragonfly drone photographs were attacked by mostly anonymous sources as CGI and Photoshop productions for an upcoming electronic game and/or movie that proved to be completely untrue and supports the perception that modern counterintelligence now uses the phony CGI Photoshop cover-up in this digital age as they once used weather balloons and swamp gas 60 years ago. In fact, Steve Winans, Kansas MUFON State Director and Field Investigator, did some research for me. Steve's profession is as a software developer for mainframe computer systems. Steve also has about 15 years experience in graphics design and photo manipulation for digital publishing. He sent me a 14-page analysis of the color fringing and other issues in digital manipulation of images versus raw original camera images. Now, color fringing is a type of distortion in which there is a failure of a lens to focus all colors to the same convergence point. It occurs because lenses have a different refractive index for different wavelengths of light. And Steve looked at the Chad photos and the Big Basin photos and sent this saying, the purple color fringing that is present in almost all of the images of the Dragonfly drones that people have submitted to earthfiles.com, including the 12 prints from Ty Brannigan, mailed to Linda Howe, is a strong indication that these images were produced by a camera and not by Photoshop or CGI. And I'll go back just to point out, on the screen, all of this blue-purple in the back is the color fringing that has to do with the different focal planes and lens diffraction. In the front, you can see that the focal plane is where you have green. When you go to the Dragonfly drone, you can see here was the front focal plane, back here where these wires extend high up into the air. This is where you get this really deep purple distortion. You get it over here. There is depth in this photo. And Steve Winans concluded that the simplest explanation is that all of these images that I have analyzed are of an actual but unknown object in the sky. I and others were intrigued by the circle diagrams and symbols that we could see on these boxes on the Big Basin. And we also knew that we were seeing similar diagrams and possibly numbers and configurations on the tails in the Chad and the Rajman photos. And when we began to start going into a close-up like this, this is about as good as I could do on the wide shot and going down to a close-up. We realized that these symbols might have some relationship to what these things might be, and that on the Chad tail, we knew that there were similar comparisons, which I'm going to go into in more depth. But here's what a Pennsylvania truck driver sent me in an email on Sunday evening, June 17th. He had flipped the Chad tail over. He was studying it at Earth Files and decided that maybe he could see what was on this tail more clearly if he turned it in this direction. And he sent me this email saying that he could make out what he determined was plus X space YX7 plus. And then when he Googled that configuration, this is what came up. Took him to this website. PDS stands for Planetary Data System, and down here you can see that's highlighted in yellow that we are starbase.jpl.nasa.gov. When I Googled plus X space YX7 plus, I found another PDS file that I've highlighted with yellow. Mission name, Deep Space Program, Science Experiment. Spacecraft name, Clementine 1. Producer, institution name, Naval Research Laboratory. And then if you Google Deep Space Program Science Experiment, there is information about the Clementine 1 lunar mapping mission by the Naval Research Laboratory. Clementine 1 launched on January 25, 1994 from Vandenberg Air Force Base in California as a joint ballistic missiles defense organization and NASA effort to test lightweight sensors and electronics for military and civilian uses. Clementine was supposed to visit and photograph an asteroid called Geographus, a Greek name. But the mission ended when NASA JPL said that power suddenly dropped so low that telemetry from Clementine was no longer intelligible. When you Google starbase.jpl.nasa.gov, you are taken to a long index of Clementine files. There, if you follow up on another URL, you are taken to lunar images. I did this, but I was not able to download them to my desktop. Is there a connection between the Dragonfly drones and the 1994 Clementine 1 or other lunar missions? Was Clementine 1 looking for structures on the moon like those shown yesterday by Rich Dolan, who let me borrow these for today's presentation? And these were in a book that was copyrighted 1976 entitled Somebody Else is on the Moon. And this was by George Leonard. People were asking these questions in 1976, so I assumed that by 1994 with Clementine 1, there had to be some very specific DoD Pentagon reason for why they wanted Clementine 1 to have a mission of photographing every square inch of the moon in the back. And I talked with geologist Shoemaker when all of those comet pieces slammed into Jupiter. I was in Baltimore at the Hubble Space Telescope Institute on that day, and they broke out champagne when they all had gone into Jupiter, and it was a big news event. And Dr. Shoemaker was there, and I asked him about Clementine 1 because he was the head of the photographic mission. And he had been so articulate and he was so forthcoming. And then when I just asked what seemed to me the logical question, sir, what about the photographs on the back of the moon? I understand Clementine has photographed every square inch of the back of the moon and the poles, but I haven't seen any of those photographs. He just completely shut down. He disengaged and shook my hand and went away. And I knew then there was something more about Clementine 1. What I did not know in 1994 at the Hubble Institute is that by 2007 I would be seeing photographs of aerial machines and interviewing people who were describing something that might have an intimate reason for why we put Clementine 1 up there in the first place. The Dragonfly drone mystery deepened much further on June 26, 2007. When a man describing himself as a scientist and computer software expert who had worked from 1984 to 1987 for a Defense Department-funded laboratory in Palo Alto, California, sent me this long email. Well, actually, the email went first to me, Coast, and then he set up his website, and it says, I am using the alias Isaac and used to work in what was called the CARET, all caps, C-A-R-E-T, the CARET program in the 1980s. During my time there, I worked with a lot of the technology that is clearly at work in the recent drone strange craft sightings, most notably the language and diagrams seen on the underside of each craft. And Isaac explained that he had spent years writing code, designing both analog and digital circuits. And he had helped design software running on supercomputers that could juggle millions, trillions of rules necessary to create a simple, complex diagram. And in his email, he continued, I am releasing what would be called tremendously sensitive information, even by today's standards. Sensitive is not necessarily synonymous with dangerous, which is why my conscience is clear as I offer this material up for the public. My government has its reasons for its continual secrecy, and I sympathize with many of them, But the truth is that I am getting old and I am not interested in meeting my maker one day with any more baggage than necessary. Furthermore, I put a little more faith in humanity than my former bosses do, and I think that a release of at least some of this information could help a lot more than it could hurt, especially in today's world. I would estimate that with the information contained in this letter, I could be narrowed down to one of maybe 30 to 50 people at best, so I feel reasonably secure. And with his letter, Isaac released several pages from a Carrot Lab document about extraterrestrial technologies that includes photos, intricate diagrams like this one, and symbols that Isaac explained function as self-activating software for self-activating extraterrestrial machines that include anti-gravity and invisibility generators and holographic projectors. Isaac also wrote in his email with the Carrot document, quote, "I'm very familiar with the language on their undersides," meaning the dragonflies, drones, seen clearly in the photographs by Chad and Rajman, and in another form in the Big Basin photos. One question I can answer for sure is why they are suddenly here. These craft have probably existed in their current form for decades, and I can say for sure that the technology behind them has existed for decades before that. The language, in fact, was the subject of my work in years past. The reason that they are suddenly visible, however, is another matter entirely. These craft, assuming they're anything like the hardware I worked with in the 1980s, and assuming they're better, in fact, are equipped with technology that enables invisibility. That invisibility can be controlled both on board the craft and remotely. However, what's important in this case is that this invisibility can also be disrupted by other technology. Think of it like radar jamming. I would bet my life savings, since I know this has happened before, that these craft are becoming visible and then returning to invisibility arbitrarily, probably unintentionally, and undoubtedly for only short periods. And this is due to the activity of a kind of disrupting technology set off elsewhere, but nearby. Think of China Lake, think of the various bases in that central part of California where all of these sightings occurred in May to June of 2007. It's especially likely because of the way the witness described one of the appearances being only a momentary flicker, which is consistent with the unintentional intermittent triggering of such a device. And to just underscore what Isaac is trying to describe, imagine if you could walk outside with equipment that would allow you to see everything in all frequencies in the skies of the earth. And you might be shocked to laying on the ground if you were seeing dragonfly drones that are normally invisible. Now here I've taken one of the black and white extraterrestrial diagrams that Isaac sent, and I've made red lines from some of the symbols to a few matching symbols on the underside of the drone tail photograph. And it's hard for me, but I think I'm on this one is where I could match it 2 places. And down here, see, this is really a difficult, here, this is what the Pennsylvania truck driver thought was a 7. It's clearly not a 7. Here is this symbol, and this is what he thought was in that original. But it got us into Google, and it got us to the Starbase JPL, and it got us to Clementine 1, interpreting it as a 7. And the other thing, as I go through, I'll show you a few more of these comparisons. I want you to start thinking, these are the self-activating software diagrams that are used to put on the surfaces of craft and structures the same exact symbols that will then, when a field is generated, act as self-activating software that never needs any hardware. This is the importance of looking at the caret symbol and this tail that Chad photographed in California, where we can find at least some matching symbols. And here is another one of the intricate self-activating software diagrams. And another just to give you a feel. They're extremely complex. So what is CARET, CARET? Here's the front page of the lab report. CARET stands for Commercial Applications Research for Extraterrestrial Technology, Q4 86 Research Report, December 1986, Palo Alto, California, a blacked out line and PACL staff. Then there is a symbol of a circle around the top of a triangle with the initials PACL inside. PACL is Palo Alto CARET Laboratory, and the bottom line is blacked out. The first paragraph of the CARET document begins as an overview. This is a complex document, so I'm only going to read highlighted excerpts beginning with the first paragraph entitled Overview, where the goal of this research has been achieving a greater understanding of extraterrestrial technology within the context of commercial applications and civilian use. For those who saw Richard Dolan's presentation yesterday morning, he was stressing the importance that our government made in getting any of the extraterrestrial technologies out into private and corporate concerns. It takes the issue of responsibility to the taxpayer off the back of the government. It then puts the pressure into private industry to back engineer, patent these designs, and keep extraterrestrial technology back engineering out of the hands of our perceived enemies. The process of converting raw artifacts of extraterrestrial origin to usable, fully documented human technology is termed extraction. Isaac wrote about the awkwardness with which the CARET lab scientists were treated by their Pentagon military overseers. What was especially amusing about the whole affair was the way that our military management almost tried to act as if the technology we were essentially reverse engineering was not extraterrestrial at all. Aside from the word extraterrestrial itself, we rarely heard any other terms like alien or UFO or outer space or anything. Those aspects were only mentioned briefly when absolutely necessary to explain something. In many cases, it was necessary to differentiate between the different extraterrestrial races and their respective technologies. And our military handlers didn't even use the word races. The extraterrestrials, plural, were referred to simply as different sources. Just the very fact that a group of some 200 scientists working inside of military, surrounding them with guns every day, of every hour, of every minute, in a laboratory in Palo Alto, and that they were dealing with retrieved extraterrestrial artifacts so defined and so labeled of not just one source, but apparently several sources. Isaac also said that he and his 200 science and engineering colleagues were civilians who, quote, were never far from the barrel of a machine gun, even inside the CARET labs themselves, where probably the biggest secret in the world were in a bunch of parts spread out on laboratory tables in the middle of that Palo Alto lab. And now back to the CARET Q486 research report. At the time of this writing, a fully successful extraction has not yet been achieved, although numerous threads of research are showing promise. Q486 focused on 4 key subjects, all of which were based on artifacts of extraterrestrial origin obtained from crash site recovery operations conducted during the last 2 decades, from 1966 to 1986, within the continental United States. I hope MUFON people will try to research more of this. 1966 to 1986 where there might be evidence that we haven't seen before of several crash retrievals in that 20-year period. The subjects are personal anti-gravity generators, so named for its small portable size, three-dimensional image recorder projector. This is for holographs. A complex system of symbols and geometric constructs capable of both defining the functionality of certain artifacts as well as manipulating their behavior, crudely analogous to a computer programming language, but without the need for a compilation or interpretation phase. Blackout, research subject, personal anti-gravity. Anti-gravity technologies are among the most ubiquitous recovered from extraterrestrial craft. While anti-gravity is most commonly associated with propulsion, the principles underlying the technology extend into a far broader domain. Indeed, virtually all aspects of most extraterrestrial craft seem to incorporate this in some way. A prominent example is the seemingly impenetrable field of controllable diameter and attenuation surrounding the craft that protects it from weather conditions and the surrounding environment, as well as debris, and surprisingly protects it from ballistic weaponry. And for those of you who have been familiar with the February 1942 Los Angeles artillery that we sent up against a diamond-shaped glowing object, none of that thousands of rounds of artillery ever seemed to have any impact on it. Perhaps most startling is the fact that the very components within a given extraterrestrial craft appear to be held in place in relation to one another exclusively by anti-gravitational means. This is a partial explanation for the commonly noted lack of rivets and adhesives in the construction of these craft. And Lou Baldwin wrote in his 1997 book about his experiences with the government lab document and his own interactions with non-humans aboard a craft, quote, everything about the alien craft was self-activated. The whole spaceship resembles a kind of living metallic animal. It has no visible rivets or screws to hold things together, nor are there any seams. There are no hinges, latches, knobs, rollers, or wheels, only a smooth, even one-piece skin that encompassed the whole craft. And here is a photograph of what is called the A1 anti-gravity generator next to the two I-beams that will, quote, immediately fly into anti-gravity positions, close quote, when placed anywhere within a certain radius of the anti-gravity generator during a specific mode of its operation. Now, I made red lines again to show you that on this anti-gravity generator and on this diagram where we found matching pieces with the Chad tail, the Rajman tail, and the Big Basin, here are matching symbols. You can see it better. I can barely see this side of the screen, so I'm not sure where. I think here is here and here. So again, think that on the right is a diagram, a highly complex diagram produced by extraterrestrials. The diagrams relate to the creation of self-activating software for self-activating machines in which the only thing that is necessary is to have the symbols that carry volumes of information in them on the surfaces of the self-activating machines and even on structures. Here's another example from the other side. And in looking to match these symbols, I found something that was very interesting to me because I took tracing paper, excuse me, I took tracing paper to make sure that I was being accurate. And when you would put tracing paper over these symbols, and then you would think that you were matching to a symbol, you would find that the symbol you thought was just slightly off or had a tiny dot or a little tiny line. And you began to realize that this is so complex that the differences are huge. And when you find matches, they are exactly what is over here, but this is extremely difficult to even copy. The curved I-beams, A2 and A3, are primarily differentiated by their lengths, which are 7.2 inches and 9.1 inches respectively. Despite the differences in their lengths, both of these artifacts weighed almost identically, the same, 2.6 ounces. While initial experimentation indicated that the I-beam artifacts were composed of a consistent, solid material, experiments on A1's component mode suggest that the I-beams are more internally complex, somehow containing information that describes their position and their orientation in relationship to A1 when the anti-gravity component mode is in effect. In another place, Isaac said that all of these extraterrestrial artifacts in the beginning was like picking up just a load of glass. Solid, no moving parts, dense. And the idea of dark glass comes up in many, many cases in what we are talking about, extraterrestrial artifacts that have no moving parts. Again, I've made red lines to show that here is the matching symbol that the Pennsylvania truck driver thought was a 7 on the Chad tail. Here it is on this I-beam. And this symbol in the middle is identical over here on this I-beam. And here is an actual photograph from Isaac of the A1 generating a field that suspends the I-beams on either side, allegedly all done with the self-activating software generated by the symbols on the extraterrestrial technology. The next page that Isaac released jumps to page 56 and shows 4 rings and an arc with needle points here. Right there, look at these needle points, look at these rings, and keep that in your mind as we look at a photo from Big Basin. And this was estimated by Ty Brannigan to be about 25 to 30 feet long. So I'll go back one time. This is in a lab on a small scale of what they were studying. And here is the June 5th, 2007 machine that slowly rotated one way and then another, long enough for Ty Brannigan to get his 12 photos. And then there is this elegant carrot diagram that evokes crop formations of the past 2 decades, such as this spiral of circles in the East Field near Alton Barnes in Wiltshire, England on June 17, 1996. There were 89 circles along 648 feet of wheat. And this elegant pattern reported in barley at Windmill Hill near Avebury, Truslow, England on May 25th, 2009. And this highly strange pattern of unidentified symbols that evolved from the summer solstice of 2009 and was not completed until June 30th. And here's what first appeared on June 21st, 2009 in the Milk Hill wheat field. Then odd circles and rectangles were found added the next day on June 22nd. And 8 days later, these bizarre symbols were added on June 30th to the upper 2 parts. The whole pattern then measured at least 1,200 feet long. Over in the south field across the road, more odd symbols were reported in wheat on June 27, 2009 in a formation about 320 feet long. And then there is this extraordinary 300-foot diameter pattern discovered in a barley field at Barbary Castle in Wiltshire, England on June 1st, 2008. There had been rain all day before and through the night, and the ground was sopping and muddy. UK crop formation investigator Charles Mallett told me he walked about 200 meters to reach this pattern, and he had 3 to 4 inches of mud underneath his boots. The mud went up all the boots onto his jeans. He had mud up to his waist. but when he reached the exterior of this intricate pattern, quote, "It was perfectly clean, no mud anywhere. No one had walked anywhere around or in that fragile young barley." Now, a retired astrophysicist from the University of Arizona was studying this photograph at my earthfiles.com website when he realized with shock that he was looking at a mathematical graphic for pi out to 9 decimal places, 3 point, and you can see it here. Pi is a Greek symbol for the ratio of any circle's circumference to its diameter in Euclidean geometry, which is equal to, and it can be 3.14 into infinity, because pi is what is called an irrational number in which the decimal expansion never ends and does not repeat. It is truly a number of infinity. Mike Reed told me, quote, "In looking at the pattern, the thing that struck me was the little dot right near," I can hardly see. I had no idea I'd have such a problem seeing this. I almost have to think I will, because you need to see this. You know what? I'm going to do this. Okay. Here's the dot. This is what caught his attention right here. And he is an astrophysicist. He has made telescopes his whole life. He thinks in terms of tubes, circumferences, pi. He sees this dot, and it occurred to him to measure right here in front of the dot. Now that gives him a particular diameter of this arc. So he's the one who superimposed these lines based on this first one. So then he comes back, now he's got these lines based on this combination. So he starts over here, 1, 2, 3, and there is this 90-degree, what we're calling a ratchet. Here's 3. Here's the dot. Here's the 1. Here's a 90-degree ratchet. 1, 2, 3, 4. 90-degree ratchet. 1. 90-degree ratchet. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. 90-degree ratchet. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9. Here we're at 9. 90-degree ratchet. 1, 2. 90-degree ratchet. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. 90-degree ratchet. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. 90-degree ratchet. 1, 2, 3, 4. And I'll discuss this in a minute. And yeah, and yeah. And astrophysicist Mike Reed, he called me on the phone and he said, "Linda, in all my years, it would never have occurred to me that you could make a pie on a horizontal surface with arcs and 90-degree ratchets as accurately as this." Now, in terms of why these 3 circles, many, many people over the last 4 years have puzzled over this, and let me tell you, it's not a clear answer. And what Mike Reed told me is that what he's dealing with and looking at this is some kind of a mathematical mind in which they are saying to a certain degree that they are kind of letting us humans know that they know, the they, whatever the intelligence is, that they know we have a decimal arithmetic system, and that this clearly indicates whoever made the pattern understands that, and that those 3 circles at the top might be a way of telling us they also understand the concept of multiplying simple numbers as ratios of circle areas. And then Mike Reed made the point that if you look at the big circle and you compare it to the middle circle, it's a 2-to-1 ratio. If you look at the middle circle to the small circle, it's a 3-to-1 ratio. And if you look at the small circle to the large circle, it's a 6-to-1 ratio. Now, where have we seen this today? The CARET document, the self-activating software. Look at this. It's exactly. And here's what Isaac said. In our technology, even today, and in fact, I'm going to let you, while I read this, I'm going to let you compare. In our technology, even today, we have a combination of hardware and software running almost everything on the planet. Software is more abstract than hardware, but ultimately it needs hardware to run it. In other words, there's no way to write a computer program on a piece of paper, set that paper on a table, and expect it to actually do something. The most powerful code in the world still does not do anything until a piece of hardware interprets it and translates its commands into actions. But their technology is different. It really did operate like the magical piece of paper sitting on a table. They had something akin to a language that could quite literally execute itself, at least in the presence of a very specific type of field. The language is a system of symbols along with geometric forms and patterns that fit together to form diagrams that are themselves functional. Once they are drawn on a suitable surface made of a suitable material and in the presence of a certain type of field, they immediately begin performing the desired tasks. It really did seem like magic to us. And to just clarify a little bit more, it would be as if you took a piece of Xerox paper, just normal copy paper, and you put it on a table, and that's all that ever happened. The paper would know how to make text. It would know how to fold itself. It would know how to move through the air to Joe Smith. Joe Smith would think, just think. Most of this relates, like Jim Sparks said last night, telepathic communication is all this software needs. Joe Smith thinks X, the paper would write his text, fold itself up, and go to John Doe. John Doe does his thinking, the paper would execute his thoughts, fold itself up, and go to some other place. The language is actually a functional blueprint. The forms of the shapes, symbols, and arrangements are functional. What makes it all especially difficult to grasp is that every element of each diagram is dependent on and related to every other element, which means no single detail can be created, removed, or modified independently. Their language is entirely context sensitive, which means that a given symbol could mean as little as a 1-bit flag in one context, or quite literally contain the entire human genome or a galaxy star map in another. Word was that the extraterrestrials could design these diagrams as quickly and easily as a human programmer could write a Fortran program. It's humbling to think that even a network of supercomputers was not able to duplicate what ETs could do in their own heads. Could crop formations around the world since at least the 1970s have been functioning as self-activating software placed each year in some chronological geographical relationship like the CARET diagrams in order to do what? Even this July 17th, 1991 wheat pattern at Barbary Castle that emerged 17 years before the Pi formation at Barbary Castle, both have the ratchet design. We didn't have a clue back in 1991. There it is. Astronomer and mathematician Gerald Hawkins, author of Stonehenge Decoded, studied this Barbary Castle pattern and concluded it contained 5 geometry theorems not found in any historic or academic texts. Further, Dr. Hawkins wrote to me, quote, "After studying the Barbary Castle and other formations, I find an intellectual profile that is unique and profoundly mathematical." By 1995, German researcher Wolfgang Schindler had made black and white diagrams of all the crop formations he knew about since 1990. He wrote in the spring 1995 edition of the Circular, quote, "Each pictogram contained at least one element that was not there in another pictogram, and other elements changed their positions from pictogram to pictogram." And remember what I told you about my trying to take tracing paper to trace and match between the photographs of the extraterrestrial artifacts and the software, the self-activating software, and that there are these tiny, minute differences. And here, we didn't know anything about the Dragonfly drones or the Carrot document, and yet back in this period of time in 1995, what Wolfgang organized here is beginning to have some kind of pre-resonance to what we have received in 2007 onward in terms of the Carrot diagrams and the extraterrestrial artifacts. And this echoes Isaac's own comment in an email, quote, "What makes it all especially difficult to grasp is that every element in each diagram is dependent on and related to every other element. The ability for a single small symbol to contain, not just represent, tremendous amounts of data is another aspect of this extraterrestrial concept. Jim Sparks was taught 19 pages in English text were in one small black half-inch diameter solid circle when he was in this holographic projected world in which they were teaching him symbols and numbers." Another surprising explanation for crop formations came to me from a man that I met inside a 1993 Wiltshire, England crop formation that I was investigating. The American told me that he had firsthand information that the American Central Intelligence Agency was trying to photograph from satellites every crop formation in chronological sequence so computers could look for mathematical patterns that might be decoded. Then the man startled me by explaining that the CIA's theory was that we are dealing with time travelers, and the crop formations were providing something like a complex monitoring technology to gauge the effectiveness of the time travelers' efforts. And when I asked him why, he had no answer. But alien symbols and time travel also emerged in December 1980 at the RAF Bentwaters Woodbridge Air Force Base in Suffolk County, England. Strangely moving aerial lights, beams, and at least one craft interacted with several military personnel over a 72-hour period from midnight December 26th until sunup December 28th, 1980. At the time, the joint UK and US RAF Bentwaters Woodbridge was NATO's largest air base in Europe, and there were highly classified nuclear weapons in some of the weapons storage areas. Not only in Bentwaters, this past year I have learned that there were nuclear weapons also on the Woodbridge side, 2 carefully and closely held secrets by the UK and the US. After midnight on December 26th, Staff Sgt. James Penniston in Charlie Flight Security was called to the Woodbridge East Gate. There he met with men who were reporting strange, colorful lights in the Rendlesham Forest that ran along the Woodbridge airfield. After learning from Central Security Control that unidentified aerial objects had been tracked on radar going into Rendlesham Forest, Sergeant Penniston decided he had to go into the civilian forest to find out what was happening. 2 young airmen went with him, John Burroughs and Ed Kavansak. As the men followed the light eastward, their radios filled with static and they lost contact with Central Security Control for about 45 minutes. During that time, none of the 3 men remember the same details. But John Burroughs and Jim Penniston both remember running after lights that moved so quickly through the dense tree growth. Jim Penniston says that he watched the white light transform into a solid, black, glassy, surfaced craft on the forest ground. Penniston says he touched raised symbols like Braille at the front of the triangle, and his mind filled with binary code of zeros and ones, plus a download of telepathic information about the source of the solid black craft and why it was there. Penniston told me that he did not talk to anyone about reaching out to touch those symbols and receiving that stream of zeros and ones in his mind. He never even told John Burroughs. But apparently AFOSI or NSA, National Security Agency Intelligence, knew Sergeant Penniston was not telling the whole truth when he was ordered to do a sodium pentothal hypnosis. Another footnote, we have also learned, and I think it's pretty solid information, that within 24 hours of the encounter by Jim Penniston, Ed Kvansak, and John Burroughs in Rendlesham around 3 o'clock in the morning, 4 o'clock in the morning on December 26, 1980, followed by all the other events, the National Security Agency of the United States took over everything related to the investigation. Wanting to know what happened to him during that drug-induced hypnosis session conducted by UK and US intelligence was the main reason Jim Penniston contacted doctor and hypnotherapist Sharon Grossman, who was in Illinois where Jim lived, to see if he could find out more. Jim worried that the military's sodium pentothal hypnosis might have been done to deliberately erase or manipulate part of Penniston's memory. In these next excerpts from his September 10th, 1994 hypnosis session with Dr. Grossman, Jim tells the American and British intelligence agents about touching the raised symbols on the craft and getting binary transmission and other information into his mind. And the mission is contact. Do they say contact with what? Us. Purpose. Research. For. To help them. To help them with what? Themselves. They are time travelers. They are us. They are us from the future. How far in the future? A long time, a very long time. And later in the hypnosis, he says 40,000 years into the future. What do they need from here? They need something from all interpreters. What do they need? Not sure, but it has to do with chromosomes or something like that. And how do they get it? They take it. From where? From the other people's bodies. Where did they take it from you? They didn't. But you were an interpreter. We only interrupted. They, the time travelers, were interrupted. They are having problems. The program, I understand what they are saying, but they weren't supposed to be there. They are having problems. The odds are against them. You weren't supposed to understand the program? No. By touching these things, the raised symbols on the craft, I activated these symbols, these zeros and ones. You touched the symbols and you set off a program? Yes, the craft was repairing itself. All they wanted was a place to stay while it repaired itself. And by touching the symbols, you disrupted the repair program. I activated a binary code. The two government men want to know why. They ask me if I ever had any other encounters with the lights and time travelers before. I haven't. Are they using us something like breeding stock? No, like Band-Aids. Do they ever take fetuses? If it is task, they do. There are different chips for tasking. The government agents know about this. That's why they want to contain the situation. They see you as requiring damage control? Yes. They see me and John Burroughs, and they're worried about Colonel Holt. They know all about us. What are the intelligence agents going to do with you? They tell me when I was at the East Gate with John, they have 5 different stories to tell. It is important to scramble dates. because that confuses and undermines consistency of eyewitness testimony, so no credibility with the public and the media. They're going to give me a warning. They tell me that I will hurt the world. It will breach national security and can destroy the system, cause wars, chaos in the streets. That's why it's important to keep it quiet. But it doesn't make any difference if I talk about the story, because it's too unbelievable. Taking chromosomes to use as band-aids in a far distant future where something is terribly wrong and another civilization is fighting to survive. Are they coming back here because we are them, as Jim Penniston says? Are they coming back to the 20th and 21st centuries because this was the last time on Earth that healthier DNA was worth harvesting? Is all the genetic material that has been harvested from Earth animals for at least a half century providing a lot of the Band-Aids? Would humanity today change its self-destructive ways if it knew for a fact that our current DNA was being harvested by self-activating machines in the UFO phenomena to be used to keep a distant version of humanity alive in a future timeline where DNA no longer replicates? One of the 2007 eyewitnesses of the Dragonfly drone mystery might have some insights to those questions. 4 years ago, right before sunrise on June 25th, 2007, a security technical specialist for a Homeland Security subcontractor in Montgomery, Alabama, was checking infrared cameras at his facility about 6 miles from Maxwell Air Force Base and its Gunter Air Force Base annex. Because his work is highly sensitive, he asked then and now that I not use his actual name, so I call him Ted Connors. What he saw was a Dragonfly drone aerial craft that seemed to be hiding behind a southern yellow pine tree at his work site. And as Ted approached, he saw something extremely strange. The front of the craft seemed to move forward and become slightly translucent, and then the back seemed to be sucked in or move, and he tried to illustrate this where there was a double image, a blur, and then the object moved off and disappeared. Recently, Ted surprised me with new information about a second encounter at work. Ted thinks that it is the intelligence behind the Dragonfly drone technology. And that startling experience occurred 9 months ago on October 6, 2010. Ted noticed that after the 2007 encounter, the pine tree looked sick, and he collected some samples for a forestry expert to examine. No cause of death, no beetles, no disease, but the surprising discovery of this rare metal palladium in the tree, source unknown. Eventually, in 2010, most of the tree was cut down and hauled away. Only a stump remained. But a friend suggested that if Ted returned to the tree site asking questions, his mind might remember something more, and his waking up at night in a sweat and with the dreams of what had occurred to him, exactly like John Burroughs and Jim Penniston, are haunted to this day and wake up at night in a sweat. So at 5:15 a.m. on October 6, 2010, Ted Connors returned to where he first saw the Dragonfly drone in 2007. To his complete shock, he began to feel electrostatic charge as he had back on June 25th, 2007. And the hair on his arm stood up, he said, like in a thunderstorm. And then in his mind, there seemed to be what looked like black writing on silver metal plates. That's the best he could describe. And the information faded up from white, down to white, up to white, and down to white. And in the interest of time, I'm only going to highlight a few. The vessel the Dragonfly drone is an information probe that enables us to understand your environment. We are able to create a tear in what you perceive as time and space in order to travel great distances for our research. We repair the tear when we return to our own planet. Your world's interpretation of what you call time and space is incorrect. All is infinite. And Ted thinks it was spelled with that A. The vessel creates communication points at the locations where we make contact with your species. And Ted got the impression that trees on this planet are used for exactly that reason, and that southern yellow pine at his work site was used to establish communication points in the electromagnetic grid of the Earth right there. Some of our species have been lost during our research, and their process ended due to interaction with your world. And he explained, Ted, that he thought that the work that I was doing in the Carrots document would relate to what he understood in his mind were something either taking these vehicles down out of the sky that would explain Isaac's 1966 to 86 retrievals of objects inside of the United States. Ted said that he got home from work 2 hours later, had an overwhelming urge to walk to his computer. He said, quote, "I typed nonstop without pausing. I typed it as I saw it in my mind. Once I had it typed, everything disappeared. It was not in my mind anymore." That's exactly what happened to Jim Penniston. For 36 hours, he couldn't get the zeros and ones out of his mind, wrote them down in a notebook, and then everything cleared. After the early morning, October 6th, second encounter at the then dead southern yellow pine tree at his work facility, Ted Connors began to look for that word Oltissis, Oltissis. 2.5 months later, on his Monday day off of December 20th, 2010, Ted took time to explore a library. On a table were some old books to check out or purchase, and one was entitled Ancient Greek Gods and Lore Revisited, copyright 1962 by Federico Ionides. This is at least the spelling and title that he remembers. He checked the book out of the library, and in the index, in his car, he found Oltissis for 3 references related to pleasure palaces in Greece and the pleasure palaces in China called Xanadu. Ted put the book on the front seat of his car with the intention of reading more, but by Wednesday morning, December 22nd, 2010, the book was still in his car when he was surprised at the end of his all-night work shift at 8 a.m. to receive a phone call to report to his boss's office.
That morning, I received an urgent call just before I was to get off to report to my superior's office. When I entered my boss's office, there were 2 gentlemen seated just opposite his desk. My boss introduced them to me as one was with the Department of Homeland Security, the other was with the National Security Agency. The 2 gentlemen introduced themselves by name, showed me their identification, then proceeded to ask me about a book that I had checked out of the library. I told them the title of the book. They said, "We need to have that book." And I asked them why. The gentleman from Homeland Security said, "This is a national security matter, and are you aware of the Patriot Act?" And I said, "Well, I've heard of it." He says, "When we ask for something, we expect to get it. The Patriot Act gives us the right to have that information, and we are asking you for that book." And I again asked why. And at that point, my boss interceded, and he says, "Go get the book." So I went and got the book. I said, "How will I get the book back?" He says, "We will contact you."
Did you, at any point in this discussion with Homeland Security and a national security agency representative sitting across from your boss, did you say, why would a book on Greek gods and lore revisited be of national security concern that under the Patriot Act, that you can come from the government and confiscate a book that I got from the library?
I did not ask that question, but I did think that question.
Did your boss know about your experience with the drone on June 25th, 2007?
Yes.
Did you and he talk about the context of this visit by Homeland Security and National Security Agency on December 22nd, 2010, in the context of the drone appearing at that tree at your facility and these two men from the government coming in and demanding the book Ancient Greek Gods and Lore Revisited?
No, that subject was never brought up. I didn't like it. I don't like it. I'll never like it, but I had to do it. I was, in a way, held captive, I guess you would say. I don't see where that book was a problem as far as national security, and it never was explained to me that it was.
How do you think that Homeland Security and National Security Agency even knew that you had checked out a book from the library 2 days before?
That's a good question. I have no idea. The only thing that could be was that I had been in contact with a certain individual who also does research in relationship to the drone craft mystery. I had related to him that I had a book via email the evening that I got home in relationship to the word Oltesis, and noticed that entry in the book in regards to Xanadu and pleasure palaces and things of that nature, and the word Oltesis. And so by sending that email, I feel like possibly that it was intercepted.
Right. The implication is that your email and your phones are being monitored by the United States government agencies, at least the Homeland Security and the National Security Agency. And that goes to the issue. They're taking the Dragonfly drone extremely seriously. And what is it about the Dragonfly drone technology and appearance here in the Earth in 2007? In all of these other interviews I've done with people who have seen this strange Dragonfly drone spanning 22 years, what is it that the government knows about these Dragonfly drones that they don't want anybody to know about and consider it a threat to national security?
Well, that's the question, the million-dollar question right there. I don't understand why it is. I don't understand what the secrecy is all about. I do understand the fact that my book was taken. I do understand the fact that my rights were violated.
Isaac talked about the fact that he assumed that the Dragonfly drones in May and June of 2007 at least flickered in and out and could be photographed because someone was jamming a frequency. And the likelihood is that so much of this happened in California because China Lake and Edwards and so many sophisticated American military operations are there. And in fact, what might have happened is they may have had a eureka moment. Oh, we have found the frequency. We can now jam it, and we can now see where the Dragonfly drones from Oltesis are.
Exactly. You hit it right on the money. If they think they can discover it, then they think they can stop it. And if they think they can stop it, then that makes them very, very happy because it's going to maintain their power base and their ability to keep us in the dark.
It seems to me that all these pieces add up, that the intelligence of the Dragonfly drones, the intelligence that downloaded the information in your head only a few months ago on October 6, 2010, are linking themselves in the words that were communicated to you to Greek history and Greek civilization.
Exactly. There is a Greek connection there, and that's where the answer is going to lie. The answer is going to lie in the Greek connection. I do not know what that connection is. That's what I want to find out. I want to know where this leads, because this leads to the possibility of the ancient Greek civilization having some contact or interaction with the people that I received the message from.
I will continue to struggle for answers and hope all of you will join me in trying not only to find the confiscated book, about ancient Greece and Otissus and the possibility that ancient Greek and ancient Greece were extraterrestrials and not humans, but to help find the real facts about our confiscated human history. Thank you. Thank you very much. Thank you. Thank you very much. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Linda. I'm sorry I have to be the bad guy. We've got a lot of plane flights, so we do have to keep this moving. We're going to go ahead and